All right. We're finishing up my favorite section of Genesis. People always say go back to Genesis. I do, in generally, chapters 1 to 12, because that sort of lays out the foundation of the world for the most part. So we finished chapter 10. You were going through the all of the sons of Noah, right? And it went through all that genealogy and says these are all the sons that existed. And it finished with what they call the table of nations. So there was 70 descendants that built nations. And it says they spoke their different languages, right? And then in chapter 11, what you're going to get is the Tower of Babylon. Uh, and that's where God disperses them. So it seems sort of backwards, but it's where it fits topically. That makes sense to sort of say he was going through the genealogy or coming out from Noah. So he's going through that whole genealogy. And then he says, hey, by the way, this is how this happened, this table of nations. So, um, but this whole concept is a lot more important through the whole Bible than you would sort of think. So basically, what happens is in chapter 11, this Tower of Babylon that we're on right now, is that the Lord disperses and he creates these 70 nations. And then in chapter 12, what he does is he chooses Abraham to be his people, right? So he creates all these nations, he disperses them, and then he chooses Abraham and says, this is going to be my special allotment. So if you subscribe to or follow there's something called the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Most famous is the Michael Heiser. He wrote, he's got the Naked Bible podcast and he wrote Supernatural and other things like that. But it is a relatively common biblical belief and framework that basically God chose Abraham and his people as his people, and then he gave the other 70 nations over to Satan, basically, the demons, whatever demons they wanted to follow in that nation. Almost like Romans 1, he already says, he gives them over to darkness. There is some wording in Deuteronomy 32 that basically sort of says, we'll give over all the other nations to the sons of God, the spiritual beings that they want, and they can be ruled. So when you have later comments about Daniel, where he runs into the Prince of Persia, that is looked at as support for this to sort of say, they've got their own demons that are influencing their piece, and this is God's chosen people. And then the story of Jesus is how you get back to, because in this chapter 12, the promise to Abraham says it will eventually go to all people. Right, these are his people for now, but eventually Abraham will bless all peoples. Right, so how does that work? And the neat part is whether you sort of fully go along with the divine counsel or not, that belief is that you will definitely see that in the New Testament. So when you go through Acts and even in the Gospels, God sends out 70 apostles to the nations. But there's a specific focus you can see in Jesus's mission in the Gospels, where it's Israel first, Abraham's people, and then the nations. Then they go out to the 70. And then when you go into Acts, it's the exact same thing. The territory, even they specifically point out names. So if you're wondering why Luke picks the names, he's just sort of like, you pick certain events, right? But he will always say, and there was a guy there from this place, and whatever. That is all about this sort of idea of Israel first, then the 70 nations. And that's why Paul wants to get to Spain so bad, because that was the farthest known nation in this 70 nations. Tarshish was the farthest away, which was in Spain. So this is Paul's mission to the Gentiles. He's saying, I've got to get all the way to the end of the Gentiles. That's just the way it is, right? So all of that starts in this section of the Bible. So when you get to chapter 11, the Tower of Babylon, the whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. And as they came from the east, in the land of Shinar, and they settled there, which is where Babylon is basically. And they said to each other, "Come, let us make oven fired bricks." They used bricks and asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, with its top in the heavens, in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we will be scattered throughout the earth." Right? So there's a couple of things to sort of unpack or think in there. Is like, one, God says to be scattered throughout the earth. Actually, he says, go off, be fruitful and multiply and spread out. He specifically tells them and reiterates it after Noah, go off and spread out, and bring order to the rest of the world as my little deputies. right? You're supposed to be going off and doing that. And they're saying, whoa, let's make a name for ourselves so that we aren't going off and doing those things, right? And what specifically do they mean? Let's make a name for ourselves, right? So one, if you go back, if you remember our videos at the beginning, Genesis 1 and 2, there is authority in naming things, right? So God named the big things, he named man, and then he let Adam name the animals, right? So there is a certain authority over that, right? So God naming man, naming him Adam, is his authority. And they're saying, we want to make a name for ourselves, right? So you're basically undermining that. You're saying, I want to take authority over myself. And that even that word, the name is meant to be sort of, I guess reputation is the closest we sort of have. But it's almost like the glory of that person or the glory of that going on. So when we talk about the name of God, it's not just like the letters that are in his name, right? It's the reputation, it's that whole aura, that glory that God has, right? So man is saying that we want to make that for ourselves outside of God and build this. Most people believe it's called the ziggurat, a temple, this tower. We want to build this ziggurat tower up to the heavens so that we can have a name, so that we can take authority over ourselves, right? Instead of the sons of Adam. And then verse 5, when the Lord came down and to look over the city and the tower that the humans were building, the Lord said, if they've begun to do this as one people having the same language, then nothing they plan will be impossible for them. So he's not concerned like, whoa, they're going to uprise and throw me over or whatever. But what he is saying is that basically they are building something evil once they've got together and allowed to work together. Come, let's go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. So there's another reference right there. This is sort of that divine council viewpoint where you say he had turned over the nations to these other demons, spiritual beings, and basically he's saying, "Come, let's go down there with the guys on my side." So it's called the divine council. So his hosts, his armies of hosts in heaven, which is often referenced to Sarah. So these beings are going to go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. Some people will explain that plural as the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and say that's the Trinity. For me, in that particular place, it does seem pretty divine counsel. And there are definitely situations where God is speaking to angels and discussing these things. So I don't see any reason why that couldn't apply there. So, and therefore, it's called Babylon. So if you are used to the name Babel, it's the Hebrew word is just the consonants, and it could be you could write Babel or you could write Babylon. The I think it was the King James version used Babel because confused the language. So Babel, they thought that was great, but I personally Babylon is an archetype all the way through the Bible, so I think it's a bit more consistent to call it the Tower of Babylon, and that's what this is the CSB, the translation, and they use Babylon as well. So after that, there is just another long record of Shem, because what we're trying to get down to down here is Abram, right? So you will see in there Eber. Eber lived 34 years. That's where you get the name Hebrew. I mentioned that in the last video. And it continues down to Abram. So Haran fathered Lot, and then Abram's wife was named Sarai, and it goes to Ur of the Chaldeans is the name right there at the bottom. Ur of the Chaldeans. Most people assume that is basically Babylon, right next to Babylon. There is a place that there is some people that believe it's up north, which geographically makes more sense in the story, but I don't think there's much support that there was an Ur in northern sort of what would be Saudi Arabia. Not really critical to the point, but just mentioning that is a discussion people have of where that came to. But the that Chaldean or Chaldean, Chaldean is the way I think it's usually pronounced, is at times synonymous for Babylon. So that sort of flips back and forth. So there's definitely a tie there that Abram is coming out of Babylon and basically after this event that's going on. So then we get to chapter 12. Chapter 12 says, the Lord said to Abram, there isn't a lot of buildup, right? You're just sort of saying, hey, this descendant is named Abram, and the Lord said to Abram, go out from your land and your relatives and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. Barak, that's a verb. I will make your name great. All right. So here is the contrast to Babylon. There, men are trying to lift themselves up. They're going to say, I want to make a name for myself outside of the authority of God. Here, God is saying, he dispersed all those people, and then he says to Abram, right, I'm going to lift you up. I'm the strength here. I'm the one in charge. I will give you a great name, right? And you will be a blessing. Now, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt. That means sort of thinks of you as nothing, slight or insignificant. And all the peoples of the ground, basically, is what that's saying. Peoples on the earth. There's a couple of translations for earth, land, and ground, and they can actually change the meaning quite a bit because a lot of times you're talking about like the Holy Land, and then sometimes you're just talking about the world in general, right? And sometimes the same word in Hebrew could be used for those, and how the translator picks one of those actually automatically shades your sort of thinking. Right. So this is sort of from the ground. It's not the earth land type of word that's usually out, right? Um, so it's people of the ground, sort of basically people that all people. Um, and they will be blessed through you or in you. It depends on how you want to do that. Will bless themselves by you is sort of a bit more complicated way of saying it, but a good translation of it. So in this right here, you get Abraham called out as God's people. He says, I'm going to make you into a great nation and bless you, make your name great. You'll be a blessing. Uh, and through you, all people will eventually be blessed. Right. So this is a blessing of you. I'm going to make your name great. And eventually, this blessing is going to continue on. Right. So then Abraham went. The only comment, it's not really a big deal, but kind of interesting. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him, right? He says up here, go out from your land, all your relatives, your father's house. So this could be a throwaway comment, but sometimes when you hear comments like that, you sort of tuck that away and said, okay, go away from all your relatives. So Abraham went as the Lord told him, and Lot went with him. And you're sort of like, that seems a bit weird. I thought he was supposed to go out from all his relatives. So he was apparently, it appears as if, sort of a keeper for Lot. But that said, as soon as they get into the land, they split up. Lot goes his way, Abram goes his way. And if you know anything about the story that's coming up, Lot has some troubles and causes some troubles as things go on. So, interestingly enough. Then there's a little side story some people have a bit of trouble with. Abram in Egypt, not trouble just from it's a bit weird. So what you find out later in chapter 20 is that Abram and Sarai are half sister and brother. Right? You don't know this at this point. So Abram is going to Egypt, and basically what he says, like, hey, while we're in Egypt, rather than saying you're my wife, say you're my sister. Both of those things are true, right? What he's saying is let's use the sister identity while we're down here because he doesn't want to be put in the way of, oh, my wife is beautiful, she gets taken and I get killed type of thing, right? So that's how this sort of story works. And if you look at 17, there is a neat sort of I guess foreshadowing of the Exodus because it says the Lord struck Pharaoh and his household with plagues because of this. And Pharaoh sent for Abram and said, what have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you say she's my sister? So that I took her as my wife. Now here is your wife, take her and go. And the Pharaoh gave his men, and they sent them away with his wife and all he had. And they had given him some gifts before, right? So it's sort of basically they're sent away with more than they had out of Egypt as they are rescued. So sort of foreshadows that Exodus where the Egyptians are hit with plagues. They end up giving them money as they're leaving, and they end up better off in the end after going through this harrowing, exciting time. So after that, the end of the chapter is just Abram and Lot separate. The sort of neat that will come up later. Lot chooses to set up Sodom and Gomorrah, basically. And then it's not a huge line, but there is a neat line to sort of say, after Lot had separated, the Lord said to Abram, look from the place where you are, look north, south, east, and west, for I will give you and your offspring forever all the land you see. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust of the earth, your offspring would be counted. This verse 17 is the one I was getting to. Get up and walk around the land through its length and width, for I will give it to you. So there's lots of discussion of the actual boundaries of the Holy Land. So what is the exact spot that this was laid out in the Old Testament? And the way most scholars would look at that is if Abram or Abraham, as he's called, if he mentions going there in the Bible, then that is the Holy Land. So basically, that's how one of the ways you sort of outline what the Holy Land is. Sometimes it will actually say this is the border, this is that. But if at any point Abram had gone there and it was clearly meant not like leaving to go to Egypt, then it's considered the Holy Land. So his feet having gone there is one of the markers as you're sort of reading through this. So that is it for chapters, what was it, 11 to 13. So hope you enjoyed.